The shrill voice of my mother-in-law pierced through the kitchen, making me flinch. "Grace, what on earth have you done to my antique china?" I turned slowly, my heart pounding. Olivia stood in the doorway, her face contorted with rage, holding up a delicate teacup with a hairline crack running along its rim. "I'm sorry, Olivia. I was just trying to—" "Trying to what? Destroy a family heirloom?" She marched towards me, her heels clicking ominously on the tile floor. "This set has been in the family for generations, and you managed to ruin it in less than a month of marriage." I swallowed hard, fighting back tears. It was an accident, a simple slip of the hand while washing up after our weekly family dinner, but I knew better than to argue with Olivia when she was in one of her moods. "I'll replace it," I offered weakly. Olivia let out a harsh laugh. "Replace it? You can't replace history, you foolish girl. This is exactly why I told Daniel he shouldn't have married you. You don't understand our family, our traditions." The words stung like a slap. I'd only been married to Daniel for a few weeks, and already his mother seemed determined to drive a wedge between us. I searched desperately for my husband, hoping he'd come to my defense, but he was nowhere to be seen. "Mom?" A softer voice called from the hallway. "What's going on?" Amelia, Daniel's younger sister, appeared in the doorway. Her eyes darted between Olivia and me, taking in the tense scene. Olivia's demeanor changed instantly. "Oh, nothing to worry about, dear. Grace just had a little accident with the china. You know how clumsy she can be." I bit my lip, fighting back a retort. Amelia shot me a sympathetic look before addressing her mother. "I'm sure it was an accident. Why don't we all calm down and—" "Calm down?" Olivia's voice rose again. "This isn't the first time she's shown complete disregard for our family's heritage. Remember the incident with your grandmother's brooch?" My cheeks burned at the memory. I'd accidentally knocked the brooch off Olivia's dressing table while helping to clean. It had fallen behind a heavy chest of drawers, and we'd spent hours searching for it. When we finally found it, Olivia had acted as if I'd deliberately hidden it. "That was different," Amelia protested. "Grace was just trying to help." "Help? Ha!" Olivia snorted. "She's been nothing but a disruption since the day Daniel brought her home. I knew she wasn't right for this family." I couldn't take it anymore. "Olivia, please. I never meant to." "Save your excuses," she snapped. "I've heard enough of them. You'll never truly be a part of this family, Grace. The sooner you realize that, the better." With that, she stormed out of the kitchen, leaving me stunned and hurt. Amelia approached, placing a comforting hand on my arm. "Don't listen to her," she said softly. "Mom's always been hard on the women who marry into the family. It's not just you." I looked at her, surprised. "What do you mean?" Amelia glanced towards the door, then leaned in closer. "There's something you should know about Mom's past. It might explain why she's so difficult." Before she could continue, Daniel's voice called from the living room. "Grace? Mom? Is everything okay?" Amelia squeezed my arm. "We'll talk later," she whispered, then raised her voice. "Everything's fine, Dan. We're just cleaning up." As we busied ourselves with the dishes, my mind raced. What secret was Amelia about to reveal, and how would it affect my already strained relationship with Olivia? I had a sinking feeling that the broken teacup was just the beginning of a much larger storm brewing in our family. As I carefully wrapped the remaining china, I couldn't shake the sense that my life was about to become far more complicated than I ever imagined. I paced our bedroom, my nerves frayed from the confrontation with Olivia. Daniel sat on the edge of the bed, his face a mix of concern and frustration. "Honey, I'm sure Mom didn't mean—" "Don't," I cut him off, my voice sharper than I intended. "Don't make excuses for her, Daniel. You weren't there. You didn't hear the things she said." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I know my mother can be difficult, but she's family, Grace. We have to find a way to make this work." I whirled to face him, anger bubbling up inside me. "Make it work? Daniel, she told me I'd never be part of this family. How am I supposed to make that work?" Before he could respond, my phone buzzed. It was a text from my brother, Victor. "Everything okay, sis? You seemed upset earlier." I hesitated, then typed back, "Can you talk?" "Of course," came the immediate reply. I turned to Daniel. "I need some air. I'm going for a walk." He stood, reaching for me. "Grace, please, let's talk about this." But I was already heading for the door, grabbing my jacket on the way out. The cool evening air hit me as I stepped outside, and I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing thoughts. Victor answered on the first ring. "What's going on, Gracie?" As I walked, I poured out everything that had happened with Olivia, from the broken teacup to her cruel words. Victor listened patiently, only interrupting to ask for clarification. "She sounds like a real piece of work," he said when I finished. "Have you talked to Daniel about this?" I sighed, kicking at a pebble on the sidewalk. "I've tried, but he always defends her. Says I need to be more understanding." "Understanding of what? Her being a complete witch to you?" Despite everything, I couldn't help but laugh. "Victor." "I'm serious, Grace. You don't deserve to be treated like this. Maybe it's time to set some boundaries." I slowed my pace, considering his words. "But how? Daniel's so close to his family, I don't want to come between them." "You're not the one coming between them," Victor said firmly. "Olivia is. And if Daniel can't see that, maybe he needs a wake-up call." As we talked, a plan began to form in my mind. It was risky, but if it worked... "Thanks, Victor," I said, feeling more determined than I had in weeks. "I think I know what I need to do." When I returned home, I found Daniel in the kitchen, nursing a cup of coffee. He looked up as I entered, his expression wary. "Feel better?" he asked. I nodded, taking a deep breath. "Daniel, we need to talk about your mother." He started to protest, but I held up a hand. "Please, just listen. I love you, and I want our marriage to work, but I can't keep pretending everything's okay when it's not. Your mother's behavior is tearing us apart, and if we don't address it now, I'm afraid of what might happen." Daniel's face softened. "I know it's been tough, Grace, but what can we do? She's my mother." "And I'm your wife," I said, my voice steady. "We need to present a united front. The next time she says something hurtful, I need you to stand up for me. Can you do that?" He hesitated, and for a moment I feared I'd pushed too far, but then he nodded slowly. "You're right, I should have done that from the beginning. I'm sorry, Grace." Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. Just then, Daniel's phone rang. He glanced at the screen and grimaced. "It's Mom," he said. I felt my stomach clench. "Answer it," I said, steeling myself. "Put it on speaker." Daniel hesitated, then hit the answer button. Olivia's voice filled the kitchen, shrill and angry. "Daniel, you need to talk some sense into that wife of yours. Do you know what she's done now?" I met Daniel's eyes, silently urging him to remember his promise. He took a deep breath, and I held mine, waiting to see what would happen next. The crisp December air nipped at my cheeks as Daniel and I pulled into his parents' driveway. Christmas lights twinkled merrily, a stark contrast to the knot of dread in my stomach. "Remember what we talked about," I whispered, squeezing Daniel's hand. He nodded, his jaw set. "United front, I've got your back, Grace." As we approached the front door, I recalled my mother Sophia's words from our phone call earlier. "Kill them with kindness, sweetie. Don't let her get under your skin." Easier said than done, I thought, as Olivia flung open the door. "There you are," she exclaimed, embracing Daniel while barely acknowledging me. Come in. I've prepared all your favorites, Daniel." We followed her into the living room, where Alexander, Daniel's father, greeted us warmly. "Grace, my dear, you look lovely," he said, giving me a gentle hug. "Thank you, Alexander," I replied, grateful for his kindness. Olivia's eyes narrowed. "Grace, be a dear and help me in the kitchen, won't you?" I glanced at Daniel, who gave me an encouraging nod. Taking a deep breath, I followed Olivia. The moment we were alone, her demeanor changed. "I hope you're not planning on ruining Christmas like you ruined Thanksgiving," she hissed, thrusting a bowl of potatoes at me. "I'm not sure what you mean, Olivia," I said, keeping my voice steady as I began peeling. She snorted. "Don't play innocent. Your little stunt with the china was just the beginning, wasn't it? Now I hear you've been filling Daniel's head with nonsense about me." I focused on the potatoes, willing myself to stay calm. Daniel and I have simply been communicating honestly about our feelings. "Your feelings?" Olivia's voice dripped with disdain. "What about my feelings? My son was perfectly happy before you came along." Before I could respond, Daniel appeared in the doorway. "Everything okay in here?" Olivia's face transformed instantly. "Of course, darling, Grace and I were just catching up." I met Daniel's eyes, silently pleading. He cleared his throat. "Mom, can I talk to you for a moment?" "Alone?" As they left, I leaned against the counter, my hands shaking. I couldn't keep doing this. The constant tension, the two-faced behavior, it was too much. Suddenly, Amelia burst into the kitchen, her eyes wide. Grace, you need to come quickly. Mom and Dan are really going at it. Heart racing, I followed her to the study. Through the closed door, I could hear raised voices. She's my wife, Mom. You need to treat her with respect. Respect? She's tearing this family apart, and you're too blind to see it. The only one tearing this family apart is you. The door flew open, and Olivia stormed out, her face flushed with anger. She stopped short when she saw me. You, she snarled. This is all your fault. You've turned my own son against me. Before I could react, she raised her hand and slapped me hard across the face. The room fell silent. I stood there, stunned, my cheek stinging. Daniel rushed to my side while Alexander appeared, looking horrified. Olivia, he thundered. What on earth has gotten into you? She turned to her husband, her eyes wild. Can't you see what she's doing? She's destroying everything. Alexander shook his head, his expression a mix of disappointment and anger. The only one destroying anything is you, Olivia. I think it's time you left. Left? She screeched. This is my house. Not anymore, Alexander said firmly. Not until you can behave like a civilized human being. As Olivia's protests grew louder, I slipped away, finding myself in the guest bathroom. I stared at my reflection, my cheek red and throbbing. A soft knock startled me. Grace? It was Amelia. Are you okay? I opened the door, fighting back tears. Amelia's eyes widened as she saw my face. Oh, Grace, she whispered. I'm so sorry, but there's something you need to know, something about why Mom is like this. I looked at her, curiosity overriding my pain. What is it? Amelia took a deep breath. It's about what happened to her when she first married Dad, the real reason she hates all the women who marry into this family. As she began to speak, I realized that the truth behind Olivia's behavior was far more shocking than I could have ever imagined. My head was spinning from Amelia's revelation about Olivia's past. I stumbled out of the bathroom, desperate for fresh air and a moment to process everything. The living room was a battleground of raised voices and accusations. I couldn't bear it anymore. I need some air, I muttered to Daniel, who was locked in a heated argument with his mother. He barely nodded, too engrossed in the family drama unfolding. I slipped out the front door, gulping in the crisp winter air. My cheek still stung from Olivia's slap, a constant reminder of how quickly things had escalated. As I paced the driveway, my bladder reminded me of its urgent need. I'd been so caught up in the chaos that I'd forgotten my initial reason for heading to the bathroom. I glanced back at the house, the muffled sounds of arguing still audible. There was no way I was going back in there. Desperate times called for desperate measures. I scanned the neighborhood, my eyes landing on a quaint house across the street. Before I could second-guess myself, I was hurrying across the road, praying the neighbors were home and in a charitable mood. I rang the doorbell, shifting from foot to foot. An elderly woman answered, her kind face creasing with concern as she took in my flustered appearance. I'm so sorry to bother you, I blurted out. I'm visiting family across the street, and there's been a situation. Would you mind terribly if I used your bathroom? The woman, introducing herself as Mrs. Henderson, ushered me in without hesitation. As I followed her to the bathroom, a plan began to form in my mind. I needed proof of Olivia's behavior, something concrete that Daniel and Alexander couldn't ignore. After using the facilities, I pulled out my handkerchief, a delicate, monogrammed piece that had been a wedding gift from Olivia, of all people. With a silent apology to Mrs. Henderson for my deception, I deliberately left it on the sink counter. Returning to the living room, I found Mrs. Henderson waiting with a cup of tea. You look like you could use this, dear, she said gently. I accepted gratefully, realizing I had an opportunity here. Thank you. It's been a difficult day with my mother-in-law, I began, carefully choosing my words. Mrs. Henderson nodded sympathetically. Family can be challenging, especially during the holidays. You have no idea, I said, seizing the moment. My mother-in-law, she's been, well, cruel, to put it mildly. Today, she even struck me. Mrs. Henderson's eyes widened in shock. Oh, you poor thing, that's terrible. I nodded, fighting back real tears. I'm at a loss. My husband tries to support me, but he's caught in the middle. I just don't know what to do anymore. As we talked, I shared more details about Olivia's behavior, painting a clear picture of the abuse I'd endured. Mrs. Maud Henderson listened attentively, her expression growing more concerned by the minute. Finally, I glanced at my watch, feigning surprise. Oh, I should get back. They'll be wondering where I am. I stood, then patted my pockets. Oh no, I think I left my handkerchief in your bathroom. Would you mind if I go grab it? Of course, dear. Go right ahead. I hurried to the bathroom, making a show of looking for the handkerchief. That's strange, I called out. I can't seem to find it. It must have fallen somewhere. Mrs. Henderson appeared in the doorway. Don't worry about it, honey. If I find it, I'll bring it over to you. Which house are you in? I described Olivia and Alexander's house, thanking her profusely. As I left, I felt a twinge of guilt for my manipulation, but I pushed it aside. I needed allies, and more importantly, I needed witnesses. Crossing back to Olivia's house, I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what awaited me inside. I had set a plan in motion, one that could either salvage my relationship with my in-laws or destroy it completely. As I reached for the door handle, I heard Olivia's shrill voice from inside. Where is that ungrateful girl? Daniel, go find your wife this instant. My hand froze on the doorknob. This was it, the moment of truth. Whatever happened next would change everything. With one last deep breath, I pushed open the door, ready to face whatever storm awaited me. I stepped into the house, bracing myself for the storm. But instead of Olivia's expected onslaught, I was met with a scene of utter chaos. Amelia and Olivia were locked in a fierce argument, their voices echoing through the halls. How dare you defend her? Olivia shrieked, her face contorted with rage. After everything I've done for this family. Amelia stood her ground, her usually gentle demeanor replaced by steely determination. What you've done? You mean tearing us apart with your cruelty and manipulation? I froze in the doorway, unsure whether to intervene or retreat. Daniel caught sight of me and rushed over, his face etched with worry. Grace, where have you been? I was about to come looking for you. Before I could respond, Olivia's sharp voice cut through the air. Oh, look who's decided to grace us with her presence, she sneered. Come to cause more trouble, have you? I opened my mouth to defend myself, but Amelia beat me to it. Enough, Mom. Can't you see what you're doing? You're pushing everyone away with your behavior. Olivia's eyes narrowed dangerously. Don't you dare take her side, Amelia. I'm your mother. And Grace is my sister-in-law, Amelia shot back. She's family too, whether you like it or not. The room fell silent, the tension palpable. Alexander, who had been watching the scene unfold with a mixture of shock and dismay, finally spoke up. Olivia, this has gone too far. Your treatment of Grace is unacceptable. Olivia whirled on her husband, her voice dripping with venom. Oh, so you're against me too? After all these years? I watched in stunned silence as the family I had married into unraveled before my eyes. The weight of guilt pressed down on me. Was I really the cause of all this? Suddenly, Amelia turned to me, her eyes blazing with a mix of anger and determination. Grace, there's something you need to know. Something I should have told you a long time ago. Olivia lunged forward, grabbing Amelia's arm. Don't you dare! But Amelia shook her off, her voice rising above the chaos. Mom was treated horribly by her own mother-in-law when she first married Dad. It was so bad that she almost left him. The room fell silent once more, all eyes turning to Olivia. For a moment, I saw a flicker of vulnerability in her eyes, quickly replaced by her usual mask of anger. That has nothing to do with this, she hissed. It has everything to do with this, Amelia insisted. You swore you'd never be like her, but look at what you're doing to Grace. You've become the very thing you hated. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Suddenly, Olivia's behavior, while still inexcusable, took on a new dimension. I found myself torn between empathy for her past pain and anger at her present actions. Daniel stepped forward, his voice quiet but firm. Mom, is this true? Olivia's facade cracked, tears welling in her eyes. For a moment I saw a glimpse of the hurt, scared woman beneath the harsh exterior. But then, as quickly as it had appeared, the vulnerability vanished. Olivia straightened, her eyes hardening once more. I've had enough of this, she declared. If you all want to side with her, fine. But don't expect me to stand by and watch her destroy this family. With that, she stormed out of the room, leaving us all in stunned silence. Amelia turned to me, her eyes filled with remorse. I'm so sorry, Grace. I should have told you sooner. Maybe things wouldn't have gotten this bad. I shook my head, still processing everything I'd learned. It's not your fault, Amelia. But what do we do now? Daniel wrapped an arm around me, his voice resolute. We stand together. No more letting Mom get away with this behavior. As I looked around at the faces of my in-laws, Daniel's unwavering support, Amelia's fierce loyalty, Alexander's dawning realization, I knew we had reached a turning point. The next steps we took would either heal this family or break it apart for good. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. I think it's time we all had an honest conversation about the future of this family, I said, my voice stronger than I felt, and about what role Olivia will play in it. The weight of my words hung in the air, and I knew that whatever happened next would change everything. But for the first time since this ordeal began, I felt a glimmer of hope. We were finally facing the truth, and maybe, just maybe, we could find a way forward together. The tension in the room was suffocating as we all stood in stunned silence following Olivia's dramatic exit. I could feel the weight of unspoken words and hidden truths pressing down on us. It was time to lay everything bare. "I have something you all need to hear," I said, my voice trembling slightly as I pulled out my phone. Daniel looked at me quizzically. "Grace, what are you talking about?" I took a deep breath. "I've been recording Olivia's voicemails for the past few months. I think you need to hear what she's really been saying when you're not around." As I played the first message, Olivia's venomous words filled the room. "Listen here, you little homewrecker. I don't care what Daniel says. You'll never be part of this family. I'll make sure of that." The color drained from Daniel's face as message after message played, each one more cruel and threatening than the last. Alexander sank into a chair, his head in his hands, while Amelia's eyes filled with tears. "I had no idea," Daniel whispered, his voice hoarse. "Grace, why didn't you tell me it was this bad?" Before I could answer, a knock at the door startled us all. Alexander went to answer it, and to my shock, Mrs. Henderson from across the street stood there, my handkerchief in her hand. "I'm sorry to intrude," she said, her kind eyes filled with concern. "But I found this, and I wanted to make sure you were all right, dear." She looked directly at me, and I felt a rush of gratitude for this unexpected ally. As Mrs. Henderson stepped into the house, she took in the tense scene before her. "Is everything okay here?" she asked, her gaze lingering on my still red cheek where Olivia had slapped me. Suddenly, Olivia's voice rang out from behind us. "What is she doing here?" she demanded, glaring at Mrs. Henderson. The elderly neighbor stood her ground. "I came to return something to Grace and to make sure she's safe. After what she told me about how you've been treating her, I was worried." Olivia's face contorted with rage. "You've been gossiping about our family to the neighbors?" she shrieked at me. "How dare you?" She lunged towards me, but Daniel stepped between us. "That's enough, Mom," he shouted. "We've all heard the voicemails. We know the truth now." Olivia's eyes darted around the room, taking in the shocked and angry faces of her family. For a moment, I saw fear flicker across her features. "You don't understand," she said, her voice suddenly small. "I was just trying to protect our family." "By terrorizing Grace?" Amelia shot back. "By making her feel unwelcome and unloved? That's not protection, Mom. That's cruelty." Alexander finally spoke up, his voice heavy with disappointment. "Olivia, I think it's time you left. We all need some space to process this." Olivia's face crumpled. "You're choosing her over me? Your own wife?" "We're choosing kindness and decency," Daniel said firmly. "Something you seem to have forgotten." As Olivia stormed out of the house for the second time that day, I felt a strange mix of relief and dread. The truth was finally out, but at what cost? Mrs. Henderson patted my arm gently. "You did the right thing, dear. No one deserves to be treated that way." As she left, promising to be there if we needed anything, I turned to face my in-laws. The room was thick with unspoken emotions. Shock, anger, betrayal, and underneath it all, a glimmer of hope. Daniel pulled me close, his arms strong and comforting. "I'm so sorry, Grace. I had no idea how bad it really was. But I promise you, things are going to change." I looked up at him, then at Amelia and Alexander. "Where do we go from here?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Alexander straightened, a look of determination on his face. "We heal, we move forward, and we do it together as a family." As we stood there, united in our resolve, I realized we had reached a turning point. The worst was over, but the hardest part, rebuilding our family without Olivia, was just beginning. And I knew, deep in my heart, that this was a challenge we would face head-on, together. The days following the confrontation with Olivia were a blur of tense conversations and sleepless nights. Daniel and I sat at our kitchen table, the weight of our decision hanging heavy in the air between us. "Are we really doing this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Daniel reached across the table, taking my hand in his. "We have to, Grace. After everything she's done, we can't keep her in our lives. It's not healthy for anyone." Just then, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Amelia. "Mom's on her way to your place. She's not taking the news well. Be prepared." My heart raced as I showed Daniel the message. We'd barely had time to process our decision to cut ties with Olivia. Now she was coming here. The doorbell rang, making us both jump. Daniel squeezed my hand. "We're in this together," he said firmly. As we opened the door, Olivia burst in, her eyes wild and her voice shrill. "How dare you?" she screamed. "After everything I've done for this family, you're just going to throw me away?" I stood my ground, drawing strength from Daniel's presence beside me. "Olivia, your behavior has been unacceptable. We can't continue like this." She turned to Daniel, her voice suddenly pleading. "Sweetheart, you can't mean this. She's turned you against me. Can't you see that?" Daniel shook his head. "No, Mom. Grace hasn't turned me against you. Your own actions have done that." Olivia's face contorted with rage. She lunged forward, her hand raised as if to strike me again. But this time, I was ready. I caught her wrist midair, my voice steady as I said, "Not again, Olivia. Never again." The shock on her face was almost comical. She'd never expected me to stand up to her like this. As she stumbled backward, the fight seemed to drain out of her. "You don't understand," she whimpered. "I was just trying to protect my family." "By tearing it apart?" I asked, my voice softer now. "Olivia, your actions have hurt everyone, including yourself." Just then there was another knock at the door. To our surprise, it was Alexander, looking tired and drawn. "I thought I might find you here," he said to Olivia. As he stepped inside, the air crackled with tension. Alexander turned to us, his eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and resolve. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," he said, "and I've come to a decision. Olivia, if you can't accept Grace as part of this family, then I'm afraid I can't continue our marriage." The room fell silent. Olivia's face drained of color as she stared at her husband in disbelief. You're choosing them over me?" she whispered. Alexander shook his head. "I'm choosing kindness and respect, something you seem to have forgotten." Olivia crumpled to the floor, her sobs echoing through the room. For a moment I felt a pang of sympathy. But then I remembered all the pain she'd caused, all the nights I'd cried myself to sleep because of her cruel. Daniel knelt beside his mother. "Mom, this is your last chance. If you want to be part of our lives, you need to get help. You need to change." Olivia looked up, her mascara streaking down her cheeks. I don't know how," she admitted, her voice small and broken. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what I was about to say. "We can help you, Olivia, but only if you're willing to put in the work. Only if you're truly sorry for what you've done." The room held its breath as we waited for Olivia's response. This was it, the moment that would define our family's future. Would Olivia choose to change, or would she cling to her bitterness? As she opened her mouth to speak, I felt the weight of everything we'd been through pressing down on me. Whatever happened next, I knew our lives would never be the same. The climax of our family drama was upon us, and I braced myself for the fallout, hoping against hope that we'd find a way through this storm together. The weeks following Olivia's breakdown were a whirlwind of change. Alexander, true to his word, asked Olivia to leave their home. The news spread quickly through their social circle, and I watched with a mix of sadness and vindication as Olivia faced the consequences of her actions. One sunny afternoon, as Daniel and I sat on our porch, Amelia pulled up in her car. Her face was a mix of emotions as she approached us. "I just came from Dad's," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Mom's gone to stay with her sister. She's agreed to start therapy." I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a start. Daniel squeezed my hand, his eyes reflecting the same cautious hope I felt. As the days turned into weeks, our family began to heal. Alexander became a frequent visitor, his relationship with Daniel growing stronger without Olivia's toxic influence. Amelia and I grew closer, bonding over our shared experiences. One evening, as we all gathered for dinner, including my parents, Sophia and Victor, I looked around the table and felt a surge of gratitude. This was what family should be: supportive, loving, and kind. My mother, ever perceptive, caught my eye. "You look happy, sweetheart," she said softly. I smiled, feeling tears prick at my eyes. "I am, Mom. For the first time in a long time, I really am." Just then Daniel's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, his face growing serious. "It's Mom," he said, looking at me uncertainly. The room fell silent as I nodded for him to answer. He put the phone on speaker. "Daniel? Grace?" Olivia's voice was hesitant, lacking its usual sharp edge. "I wanted to apologize, to both of you. My therapist suggested I make amends, but that's not why I'm calling. I'm calling because I'm truly sorry for everything I've done." I felt my breath catch in my throat. Daniel looked at me, his eyes questioning. I took a deep breath and spoke. "Thank you, Olivia. That means a lot to hear." There was a pause, then Olivia continued, her voice thick with emotion. "I know I have a long way to go, and I understand if you can't forgive me. But I want you to know that I'm working on myself. I want to be better for all of you." As the call ended, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. There was still hurt and mistrust to overcome, but it was a step in the right direction. Later that night, as Daniel and I lay in bed, he turned to me, his eyes shining with love and admiration. "You amazed me today, Grace," he said softly. "Your strength, your compassion. I fall in love with you more every day." I snuggled closer to him, feeling truly content. "We've been through so much," I whispered, "but we've come out stronger." As I drifted off to sleep, I reflected on the journey we'd been through. The pain, the tears, the moments of despair, they had all led to this. A family healing, relationships strengthening, and a love that had weathered the storm. I thought about Olivia, and for the first time, I felt genuine hope for her. She had a long road ahead, but she had taken the first step. And maybe, just maybe, one day we could all sit around a table together, the past forgiven, if not forgotten. The next morning, I woke up feeling refreshed and renewed. As I stood on our porch watching the sunrise, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in years. The bitterness that had clouded our lives for so long was fading, replaced by a sweetness that came from forgiveness and growth. I smiled to myself, realizing that this was my sweet vengeance, not in Olivia's downfall, but in our family's rise from the ashes of conflict. We had faced the storm together and emerged stronger, more united than ever before. As Daniel joined me, wrapping his arms around me from behind, I knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, we would face them together. Our love, tested by fire, had proven unbreakable. And in that moment, basking in the warm glow of the rising sun and my husband's embrace, I knew that the best was yet to come. I sat in the dim light of the study, my fingers trembling as they clutched the DVD. The label read, "The Birth of Nathan, April 17th, 2023. It felt like an eternity since I had stumbled upon it, each moment stretching endlessly as I grappled with its implications. The conversation with Richard earlier that day echoed in my mind, his words cutting deep. Infertility treatment? Why bother with that? Just focus on your duties around here, he had dismissed. It was then I felt reduced to nothing more than a mere convenience in his life. As I heard the front door open, signaling Richard's return, panic and resolve warred within me. I quickly concealed the DVD under a stack of papers and braced myself. My heart pounded against my ribcage, but I couldn't let fear win. "Richard, we need to talk," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. He gave me a cursory glance, annoyance etched on his face. "What now, Emily? More complaints about feeling lonely or neglected?" Taking a deep breath, I confronted him. "It's about us, about our family. I found something today, Richard. A DVD." I watched his demeanor shift, a fleeting look of fear replacing his annoyance. "What DVD? What are you talking about?" "The Birth of Nathan," I said, allowing the name to linger between us. "Who is Nathan, Richard? And who is Laura?" His facade crumbled. Panic flickered in his eyes as he looked for an escape. "It's not what you think, Emily. You're jumping to conclusions." "Am I?" My voice rose, a mix of anger and hurt. "I watched it, Richard. I saw you there with her during the birth. You were there for her in a way you've never been for me." His silence was a deafening confirmation. My world, once so stable, was crumbling. The man I had devoted my life to was a stranger, His betrayal exposed in the cruelest of ways. The doorbell's chime broke through the tense silence. I answered it to find a man, probably in his late 20s, looking back at me with an anxious expression. "Hello, can I help you?" My voice was barely a whisper. The man hesitated. "I'm Daniel. Is Richard here? I need to speak to him about Laura. It's urgent." A cold shiver ran down my spine at the mention of Laura's name. This was no coincidence. "Please come in," I said, moving aside. "I think we have a lot to discuss, Daniel." As we sat in the living room, the puzzle began to assemble itself. Daniel, Laura's ex-boyfriend, believed he might be Nathan's father, a child Richard claimed as his own. My marriage, it seemed, was built on lies and deceit. "I need your help," Daniel's voice was laced with desperation. "I have to know the truth about Nathan." I looked at him, feeling a newfound resolve. "You'll have it. We both will." As Richard entered the room, unaware of the impending storm, one thing became crystal clear to me. My life was about to change forever. I never imagined that my life would become a twisted tale of deceit. As I lay in bed that night, unable to sleep, my mind replayed the years spent with Richard. Our marriage, once a source of joy, now felt like a beautifully wrapped lie. I remembered our wedding day, the promise of a future filled with love and shared dreams. Richard had seemed like the perfect match, a successful businessman with a charming demeanor. But soon, the fairy tale began to unravel. Our attempts to start a family became a silent battleground. Every month brought disappointment, and with it Richard's indifference grew. I became a shadow in my own home, my presence only acknowledged when chores or errands demanded attention. The memory of my last attempt to address our childlessness resurfaced. "Richard, it's been 3 years. Maybe we should see a doctor, consider fertility treatment?" His response was a cold dismissal. "We don't need that. Just focus on your duties here." His words stung like a slap. It wasn't just about a child. It was about being partners, supporting each other. But to Richard, I was just a fixture in his pristine house, a part of the background. My thoughts were interrupted by the chime of my phone. A message from Daniel. "Can we meet tomorrow? I have something to show you." Curiosity and a sense of solidarity with Daniel compelled me to agree. The next morning, over coffee in a quiet cafe, Daniel shared his story. He and Laura had been in a serious relationship before Richard swept her off her feet. Daniel's face twisted in pain as he recounted how he had lost Laura to Richard's allure and wealth. "But I can't believe Nathan is Richard's son," Daniel said, his voice firm. "I've seen pictures of Nathan, and there's a resemblance to me at that age." His words sparked a fire within me. Richard's betrayal was deeper than I had imagined. He didn't just cheat, he stole a child's identity, a father's right. Daniel slid an envelope across the table. "I've hired a private investigator. We'll get to the bottom of this." I felt a mix of fear and determination as I took the envelope. It was time to face the ugly truth head on. And if Richard was indeed the liar and cheat he appeared to be, he would have to answer for it. Not just to me, but to everyone he had deceived. I returned home with a clear mission. I would no longer be the silent, dutiful wife. Richard's facade would crumble, and his true, repulsive nature would be exposed. And I would be the one to light the fuse. As I sat across from Richard at dinner, the silence was suffocating. Each clink of cutlery sounded like a thunderclap in the tense air. I could barely swallow my food, my thoughts consumed by the plan forming in my mind. "Richard," I finally broke the silence, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "We need to talk about our future." He looked up, his eyes void of the warmth they once held. "What about it, Emily? Planning more vacations to fill your empty days?" The disdain in his voice was a sharp reminder of how far we'd drifted apart. "No, Richard, it's about us, about our family." I pressed on, feeling a strange mix of fear and empowerment. He scoffed, pushing his plate away. "What family, Emily? We don't have kids, remember? Or is this about that ridiculous DVD again?" I felt my resolve harden. "Yes, it's about the DVD, Richard. It's about Nathan, and it's about Laura." My heart pounded in my chest, but I was determined to confront him. For a moment, Richard seemed taken aback, his facade cracking. Then he regained his composure and sneered. "What do you want, Emily? An apology? An explanation? Or perhaps a share of my wealth?" His words were like venom, each syllable dripping with contempt. I stared at him, aghast at the man he'd become, or perhaps the man he'd always been. You know what, Richard? I want the truth, I said, my voice rising. I want to know why you brought that woman into our lives, why you lied to me, to everyone. Richard leaned back in his chair, a cold smile playing on his lips. You want the truth, Emily? Fine. I was bored. You were always so busy playing the perfect housewife, so obsessed with having a child. Laura was different. Exciting. His confession struck me like a physical blow. He had betrayed our vows, our life together, for a mere diversion. I felt a surge of anger, hot and unyielding. And Nathan? I asked, my voice trembling with rage. Richard shrugged, his indifference a stark contrast to my turmoil. A convenient lie. Laura needed a father for her child, and I needed entertainment. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. You're despicable, Richard. You used a child, a woman, to satisfy your selfish needs, and you used me, your wife. Richard stood too, his eyes gleaming with malice. And what will you do about it, Emily? Divorce me? Go ahead. You'll be left with nothing. His threat hung in the air, but it no longer frightened me. I had nothing left to lose. I'll do more than just leave you, Richard, I said, my voice cold and resolute. I'll expose you for the fraud you are. Everyone will know the truth about Richard the Great. As I stormed out of the room, leaving Richard in stunned silence, I knew there was no turning back. The battle lines were drawn, and I was ready to fight. I met with Daniel early the next morning, the winter sun casting a pale light over the city. He greeted me with a solemn nod, his eyes reflecting a shared determination. We need to expose Richard, Emily, Daniel said as we found a quiet corner in the bustling cafe. I have information from the private investigator. It's not pretty. I braced myself, knowing that whatever Daniel had to say would only fuel the fire of my resolve. Tell me everything, I urged, my voice firm. Daniel slid a folder across the table to me. Inside were photographs, bank statements, and a timeline of Richard's deceit. It was all there in black and white. The affair with Laura, the secret payments, the lies he had woven so skillfully. It's worse than we thought, Daniel said gravely. Richard has been supporting Laura financially. He's been paying for her apartment, her living expenses, everything. I felt a cold fury settle in my chest. Richard had not only cheated on me, but had also used our resources to sustain his illicit affair. And Nathan? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Daniel hesitated, then spoke. Nathan is most likely your child, Emily. Laura was already pregnant when she met Richard. He knew it and still played the doting father to the world. The revelation hit me like a tidal wave. Richard's betrayal was more profound than I could have ever imagined. He had stolen the identity of a child, my child, for his twisted game. We have to bring this to light, I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. We'll expose him at the family gathering. It's in 2 weeks. Everyone will be there. Daniel nodded in agreement. I'll be there too. We'll confront him together. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of preparation and restless nights. I felt like a shadow in my own home, avoiding Richard's gaze, ignoring his attempts at conversation. My heart was set on one thing only, revenge. The day of the gathering arrived, a cold and clear winter day. The family home was filled with laughter and chatter, a stark contrast to the storm brewing inside me. As the evening wore on, I found my moment. I stood, my hands trembling slightly, and addressed the room. Ladies and gentlemen, I have something to show you. Something that will change the way you see Richard. All eyes turned to me, including Richard's, which held a flicker of fear for the first time. I played the DVD, the images of Laura giving birth, Richard by her side, filling the screen. The room fell into stunned silence. This is not just any woman, I said, my voice steady. This is Laura, Richard's mistress. And the child? He's mine. Richard has been living a lie. The gasps and murmurs filled the room. Richard stood up, his face contorted with rage. Emily, what is this madness? He spat out. You're embarrassing yourself and our family. But I stood my ground. No, Richard, the only embarrassment here is you. Your lies, your deceit, it all ends tonight. Daniel stepped forward, his presence a silent support. She's telling the truth. I've seen the evidence. Richard has been funding Laura's life with his affair. Richard's face was a mask of fury and fear. You'll pay for this, Emily, both of you. But it was too late. The truth was out, and Richard's world was crumbling around him. As the family erupted into chaos, I felt a strange sense of calm. I had done it. I had exposed Richard for the fraud he was, and in doing so, I had reclaimed my life. The family gathering had turned into a battlefield, and I stood at its center, my heart pounding with a mix of fear and triumph. Richard's mask of composure had slipped, revealing the man he truly was. "You've gone too far, Emily," Richard hissed, his face twisted in anger. "You're trying to ruin me with lies." His denial only fueled my resolve. "Lies? You call this a lie?" I gestured to the screen, still displaying the image of him with Laura. "The truth is right there for everyone to see." Murmurs rippled through the room. Relatives exchanged shocked glances, their expressions ranging from disbelief to disgust. Richard's mother, a kind woman who had always treated me like a daughter, her voice trembled with emotion. "Richard, how could you do this? To Emily, to our family?" Richard's gaze darted around the room, seeking an ally, finding none. "Mother, it's not what it looks like. Emily is manipulating everything." But his words fell on deaf ears. The evidence was overwhelming. The family's disappointment and anger were palpable. Daniel stepped forward, his voice steady. "There's more. Richard has been financially supporting Laura and her child, using family funds. He's been living a double life." The revelation sent another shockwave through the room. Richard's father, a stern man of few words, rose from his seat. "Is this true, Richard? Have you been stealing from your own family?" Richard's composure crumbled. "It's not stealing. I earned that money. I can do what I want with it." His selfishness was on full display, and the family recoiled from him as if he were a stranger. "You're no son of mine," his father declared, his voice echoing with finality. I felt a strange sense of detachment as I watched Richard's world fall apart. He had built his life on lies and deceit, and now he was paying the price. "Emily, I'm sorry," Richard said, turning to me with desperation in his eyes. "I never meant for it to go this far. Please, let's talk about this." But it was too late for apologies. "There's nothing to discuss, Richard. I want a divorce, and I want you out of my life for good." The room fell silent, the weight of my words hanging in the air. Richard looked around, his expression one of disbelief, as if he couldn't comprehend how quickly his life had unraveled. As I left the room, followed by a stunned silence, I knew that this was just the beginning. Richard would face the consequences of his actions, and I would start a new chapter of my life, free from his lies. The days following the family gathering were a whirlwind. News of Richard's deceit spread like wildfire, tarnishing his once respected name. I watched from a distance as the empire he built on lies crumbled around him. Richard attempted to reach out, his messages oscillating between pleading and anger. "Emily, we can fix this. Don't throw away what we have over one mistake," one message read. The next would be filled with accusations. "You've ruined me. How could you be so heartless?" But I remained resolute. His words no longer held power over me. I was done being a pawn in his twisted game. As the divorce proceedings began, Richard's true nature became even more apparent. He fought tooth and nail for every penny, his greed overshadowing any remnants of the man I once loved. "I won't let you leave me with nothing," he spat during one of our meetings. "You think you can destroy me and walk away? I'll make sure you regret this." But his threats were empty, his power waning. The evidence of his infidelity and misuse of funds had left him with little legal ground to stand on. The final blow came when his parents, once his staunchest supporters, turned their backs on him. "We can't condone what you've done, Richard. You're no longer welcome in this family," his father declared, the disappointment in his voice cutting through the tense air of the courtroom. As I walked out of the courthouse, the final divorce papers in hand, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I was free from Richard, free from the web of lies that had ensnared me for so long. But my victory was bittersweet. I had loved Richard once, and watching him fall so far was not a cause for celebration. It was a sad, albeit necessary, end to a chapter of my life. As I started anew, I found strength in my newfound independence. I had faced Richard and his deceit head-on and emerged stronger. It was a testament to my resilience, a promise of a brighter future, free from the shadows of the past. The day I signed the divorce papers, I felt a complex mix of emotions. Relief, certainly, but also a sense of loss for what might have been. Richard, once a man I loved, had become a stranger defined by his greed and deceit. I started rebuilding my life piece by piece. The process wasn't easy. There were days when the weight of the past years seemed too much to bear, but with each passing day I grew stronger, more confident in my newfound independence. One afternoon, several months after the divorce, I found myself at a small, quaint cafe. The place was a stark contrast to the lavish lifestyle I had once known with Richard. It was here, amidst the simple, unpretentious surroundings, that I finally felt at peace. As I sipped my coffee, lost in thought, a familiar face caught my attention. Daniel walked in, looking around before his eyes met mine. He smiled, a warm, genuine smile that reached his eyes. "Emily, it's good to see you," he said, taking the seat opposite me. "Daniel, how have you been?" I asked, returning his smile. "Well, I've been busy, working on a new project, keeping myself occupied," he replied. "And you? How are you holding up?" I took a moment before answering, reflecting on the journey I had been through. "I'm doing well, actually. It's been a time of self-discovery, of healing." We talked for hours, our conversation flowing easily. Daniel shared his dreams for the future, his passion for his work. I found myself opening up about my aspirations, my hopes for a new chapter in my life. As the cafe began to empty, Daniel reached across the table, taking my hand in his. "Emily, I've seen the strength and courage you've shown. You've inspired me in more ways than you can imagine." His words warmed my heart, and I felt a connection with him, a bond forged through shared adversity. "Daniel, I started, but words failed me." He squeezed my hand gently. "I know, Emily, and I'm here whenever you're ready to start again, to start something new, together." I looked into his eyes, seeing the kindness and understanding that had been absent in my life for so long. In that moment, I realized that while one chapter had closed, another was waiting to be written. "Thank you, Daniel," I whispered, a sense of hope blossoming within me. "I think I'm ready to start that new chapter now." As we left the cafe together, I felt a lightness in my step, a sense of optimism about the future. Life had thrown me into the depths of despair, but I had emerged stronger, ready to embrace whatever lay ahead.